Shalom, shalom. Welcome. We are going to talk about a few subjects. And basically, we're just coming, the sun's starting to set now, so we're into the next day. So we're in the 10th of Av. We just came out of the 9th of Av, which everybody's expecting seriously bad things to happen, not us. If you noticed in Israel, the crowd that was at the wall, huge, huge, huge. I think that's awesome. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. I also want to just recap on a few things I was sharing with everybody earlier. Now Israel is starting to think about building their own arms, which is about time, not relying on other countries and keeping it in-house. So that's a good thing. They also got a large amount of military equipment from the U.S., billions of dollars. Nice. So that's a good thing. Yet they still need to rely on the Most High. And that's where they're actually going to start realizing some things, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight as well. The 9th of Av is actually the 9th of the 8th, is what it actually means, the 8th month. So on that subject, we are talking about what happened. Most people, when you talk about it, it's the destruction of the temple, where they're fasting and they get into a mode where they start to mourn. They recite the prayers of mourning. They get into it. They get into it to the point where you got to ask yourself, once you know the scriptures, excuse me, that if you get yourself into that mode, if you're not setting yourself up to relive it again, and they are. This year it didn't happen, which is awesome. Yet the other thing is, I was listening, well actually I was read an article with this rabbi. He was talking about we should be celebrating the building of the temple, not the destruction of the temple. Now, I thought that was awesome. I read that about a week ago, and I was, pondering on it. I thought that was pretty good. Somebody saying something that's positive instead of reflecting on. And so for tonight, I came across this article that talks about that. So I wanted to read that article because that's what it talks about. It's the rebuilding of the temple. That's what's the driving force of the Israeli people right now. And right now, we all know it's the third temple. And we shouldn't, say, no, you don't need to do that because it's scriptural. It's going to be built. And it's in the scriptures, it's in prophecy. And because it's going to be built, it's also a piece of time in eternity that we can look for as what's going to happen in these days coming up. As you can tell, there's a lot of stuff going on. Yet we don't focus on that because just like in this article and what the rabbi was saying, it's the rebuilding of the temple that the focus should be on, and not the mourning and all that, which is good and everything. You want to remember it, yet you don't want to memorialize it. You want to get it into your senses that we are going to build the temple because we have prophecy to do it. And that's what they're doing. We went to Israel and we've seen the menorah. They already got the priests starting to do all their things. The Kohen, the high priest, the regular priest, they got them all picked out. They got the clothes made. They're cooking along. And there's also, because they're going so fast on it, that there's a bill in Israel that's going to be, they're trying to pass it. It won't pass. It won't pass. Where it would be illegal for Jews to ascend to Temple Mount. Now the argument with that is because Temple Mount, they got their own things there. It's not real there. It's la da da. It's not this. It's not that. And can't do that. Yet what they're trying to do is prevent the thought of rebuilding a temple. The bill's not going to pass. They already have too many people that have already opposed it. So, and then we have quite a few politicians that are over there that are adamant about it. One of them actually went up to the Temple Mount recently with a group of people and caused a stir. Good. Do it. Because that's what, you keep it in the forefront of everybody's eyes about building that temple. The article was, it's a time to mourn, a time to build. And I want to focus on the build part because that's what we need to do for everything in our lives. This is a good time to really reflect on stuff like that. So I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna skip around because I want to get to the important parts. It's a lengthy one and it's a really good one. In the Holy Temple, its destruction and subsequent attempts to rebuild it, 70 CE to today. The history of the Jewish experience since the Holy Temple was destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago at the hands of foreign invaders is known as the exile. Exile from the land and from their spiritual center. The Holy Temple, the Jewish nation has been marking time, waiting to leap as it were back in history to take back its own destiny above all, to rebuild the Holy Temple, the house of God. The Jewish nation has seen to it that the Holy Temple was never forgotten throughout the darkest moments of her exile, and that her sons and daughters would one day renew that divine service on Mount Moriah and rebuild the Holy Temple. See, it's been going on for a long time, and we're that close to having the third temple. And we know what happens when that comes about. Yeah, along the way, forgetfulness and misunderstanding did creep in. To this day, many Jewish households continue to observe the tradition of maintaining a half-meter square patch of wall scraped clean of plaster on as one enters the house. For how can we complete our houses when God's house lays in ruins? So that's what they do. They do that in the house there, and they observe that because they can't finish their house because God's house is not. It's different, yet it is in the forefront. When they walk into the house, they see that. And however, it's not the destruction that we are intended to commemorate. It's the divine promise that we one day will build the Holy Temple again. We were instructed to enshrine the 9th of Av as a day of permanent mourning for the Holy Temple, yet as a day to remind us of our responsibility to rebuild the Holy Temple one day, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. We weren't instructed to its destruction. We were instructed to remember the Holy Temple in order to remain spiritually and intellectually prepared to rebuild it. Whenever the moment arrives, the following paragraph, excerpt from the Odyssey of the Third Temple by Rabbi Yisrael Ariel and Rabbi Chaim Richman of the Temple Institute. Yes, of course, it says it's 1993, no longer available in print. So that's a good reference point. Yet that's where they got some of the stuff from. Tell the tale of a nation coming to grips with destruction and by sheer force of will, shaping its every thought and action toward the day when tragedy will turn to rejoicing with the building of the Holy Temple. The Holy Temple lies in ruins. The Roman Empire, which ruled over the vast stretches of the ancient world, engaged in their legion's finest elite forces in Judea. No effort was spared in the struggle to regain honor lost in the revolt which erupted in Jerusalem against the occupation of the Caesars. The campaign had one goal: the rebellion must be snuffed out. The city was besieged for many long months. The population continued to battle, yet now slowly dying of hunger, still refused to surrender to the Roman conquerors. With their very last ounce of strength, the heroes of Judah fought to save the temple. As the realization of the destruction loomed came closer, the priests hid many of the sacred vessels in various locations throughout the temple and Jerusalem. Even in the last minutes of the war, the priests continued carrying out their sacred duties. See, this is amazing. In the midst of all this, they refused to stop their duties. They were not moved by what was going on. We can learn from that. You see, they continued carrying out their sacred duties in spite of the fact that the temple courtyards flowed with blood of the slain, and fire roared at the entrances. The tragedy, the scope of it, is recorded in the words of the rabbi. And this one here says, the day the temple was destroyed was the 9th of Av. It was the conclusion of the Sabbath and the end of the 7th year cycle. It was during the time of the priestly shift. And the Kohanim and the Levites stood at the platform and continued to sing, did not cease until the enemy entered and subdued them. When the high priest saw the holy temple was in flames, he climbed up to the roof of the sanctuary together with groups of young priests. They held the keys to the temple in their hands and spoke before the Holy One, blessed be He. Master of the universe, it appears that we were not worthy of being trusted officers for you. Take back the keys to your house. And with that, they threw the keys upward. The image of a hand appeared in the heavens and took them. And when the Levites and the high priest saw that the holy temple was indeed consumed with flames, they held the lyres and trumpets and plunged into the fire. The temple service was cut down while in progress, for its interruption can never be conceived of, nor war or destruction or even that of the fire raging within. The Talmud and the Midrash present a detailed description of each stage of the destruction. Vivid images are also provided by Flavius Josephus, who was an eyewitness both of the destruction and the victory parade in Rome. Sages describe Titus' trek from Jerusalem back to Rome upon returning from the war. Titus removed the veil which separated between the holy and the Holy of Holies and spread it out like a net. He gathered all the sacred vessels together and placed them inside, and then he embarked by ship for Rome to boast and seek honor. Even though on a simple political and military levels, they were far more significant victories for the Roman Empire than this. They saw fit to make this event and preserve it for future generations and fame the moment, the Ark of Titus. Here the captain of Judah is celebrated, the capture of Judah is celebrated, and the victory parade of the plundered temple vessels arriving in Rome can be seen to this very day during the course of the long and bitter years. This scene became a symbol of Jewish exile. Yet hope in itself is born even in the darkest moments. Now, even one of those sages, they wrote in it that the Romans were convinced that the saga of the Jewish history had ended, according to their understanding. The Jewish people would now become scattered and disassociated and disappear from the stage. Yet in reality, the opposite occurred. The Jewish people called up vast resources of inner strength and prepared for the long exile. Because why? They knew that the day would come, that they would be able to rebuild the temple. Like you said, today, tomorrow, next month. Yet, they knew that one day would come. So they prepared even in exile. And then one of them mentions that on this very day on which the temple was destroyed, the Messiah was born. And that's J.T. Baruch 2:4. That's the Midrash statement. Beautifully expresses the heart and conscience of the Jewish people and the collective Jewish experience. Hope and rebirth spring forth from tragedy itself, which is true. Every time tragedy hits Israel, what happens? They rebound and they move forward. You know, if a loved one is murdered, what do they usually do? They build a city and name it after that individual. They just keep building and dedicate it to that person. You know. Even like the October 7th ordeal there was a gentleman who came from the United States, went and did his 200 days of service in Gaza. He came back to the States because he served his duty, and he ended up passing away. He ended up with some I'm not recalling what it was. It was something that could have been prevented if they caught it early enough. Yet he was so dedicated into doing his duty for Israel that he went and served the 200 days in the military. That's amazing. Yet you see that all the time. They're not deterred by anything. Look at even the Sapristines. You know, they were evicted from Gaza, Gush Katif. They were ousted out there. Where are they? They're in a place, and they're moving forward. They're not going in reverse. Everything they're doing is moving forward. You know, Moshe himself, a victim of a lot of that terrorist activity, where he was shot at. He's got one arm missing because of it, and he's missing a couple of fingers. Yet in the midst of all that, when the rockets are raining down, he's got a smile on his face. He's looking to preserve life, going to helping other people. That's the heart of the nation. That's the heart of the people. And that's why in this time frame I want to focus on that, because that's a great lesson in itself, because whatever we go through, it's all distractions anyways. Whatever we go through, we can come out on the other side with a promise, because we had the promise before and we have the promise after, just like that. They have the promise of rebuilding the temple. You know, it says it right in Amos. It says he's going to rebuild the temple of the temple of David. In Amos, I'm not recalling exactly how it's written. Yet he said he's going to rebuild it. So you got that promise. Israel had the promise of you. I will take you to a land. This will be your land, and nobody will take it from you. Where are they? They're in Israel. It's not the whole land that it was before, yet it's not over. Not over. You know, it's not over. You know, the customs developed as a remembrance of the temple. There's a lot of things that they do that, to me, it's kind of just dragging you down. So I'm going to go over, just pass by that, you know, because they talk about all the other festivals. It's doing it in remembrance, you know. When we do the Seder meal, it's in remembrance of something. You don't relive the thing. We still go through the process, yet we don't go and be exiled. And yet all these festivals that we do, we're always doing it in remembrance. Yet I also know that if we do them, he also meets us there. He always shows up. Always. I mean, the one that was the best so far was during Tabernacles. That one season where he just came and he just visited us, and that place just, it went to another level, and it was awesome. So in the preparation for the rebuilding, there have been attempts throughout the years to rebuild that temple many times, and they weren't successful, yet they didn't pack their bags and say. They packed their bags, went back, and regrouped. Now, how many more years before it comes? They try it again. And then they try it again. And they try it again. And they're going to continue trying again. They got one more. The final one. Yet it's going to happen. Let's see. Okay. You know, they talk about, same thing with this rabbi. He talked about, when he had mentioned that we should be celebrating and looking to be building the temple, rebuilding the temple. And that's hope. It brings hope, because now you got to focus on that temple. We're going to rebuild it. One day we're going to rebuild it, you know. And he had talked about that, and hope from disappointment, because he says, you know, yes, it did happen. We can't deny it. It didn't happen. We got evidence all over the place. Yet we also have word that it was going to happen, and we also have word that it's going to be rebuilt. Yeah. So now, let's rebuild. Now, the disappointment was that, yes, it was destroyed. Why was it destroyed? You know, is it because of this, you know, lots of people say it's because of the sin of man not doing what they're supposed to be doing, that in everything, it comes down to, yes, and it was disobedience, which is sin. So it comes down to, yes, it was destroyed, yet we don't sit and get so involved in it that we miss the rebuilding of it, you know? Because we have a promise in the scriptures that was fulfilled about the rebuilding of a temple. And that's this temple. You know, that was fulfilled because he says, I'm going to write, you know, on tablets of stone, I wrote, yet I'm going to write them on tablets of flesh, on the tablets of your heart. So, and then he says also that you are the temples. You are the temple. So we could take that scripture and say, well, we're going to leave it there, and what they're doing is wrong. It's not, because it's scriptural. He's told them to do it. Plus, if we're watching Israel, and that's the timetable of the events and of these seasons we're in, we watch what goes on there, we can be like the sons of Issachar and know the times that we're in and what we need to do. Like Ema always says, she's always saying that, you know, the sons of Issachar. We are the sons of Issachar. We know and discern the times that we're in. So, yes, it's like we encourage them to keep building and rebuilding that temple, because as soon as that goes into effect, we know where we are in that time frame. You know? Yet we're not going to sit there and, because we know what happens too when they build it, yet we're going to know that the time we're in, how to pray for that time frame for the people, what we need to do in the process of that. Because we are in our temples, you know, the temple that he says. So this article goes through the temple services that were renewed in the 12th and 14th centuries. They tried to get it going again, and of course that didn't happen. You know, they got everything going. I'll read. During this period, hundreds of Jewish scholars in France immigrated to the Holy Land. A portion of them settled in, I guess that's Acre, while others resided in Jerusalem and other cities. Yet as a result of ensuing persecutions and decrees against them, the discussions on the possibilities of building were halted, and the movement lost its momentum. Now, in modern times, in recent times, newfound liberties and freedom for European countries have been accompanied by further practical attempts to reestablish temple service. For the possibility had been created for the Jewish people to return and renew national life in its own land. 1948. A movement sprang up wherein many of the Israelis' great scholars began publicizing declarations and publishing books on the subject of resettling the land, arousing public interest and attention around the question of rebuilding the temple as well. The movement included Rabbi Yehuda Bibas, Rabbi Yehuda Alcala, and Rabbi Zvi Hirsch Kalischer, and others. Now, Rabbi Zvi Hirsch was a leading figure in this effort and turned into writing to the great Jewish philanthropists of the age, Baron Asher Anshel Rothschild, who commanded the respect of all the world's royalty, and he suggested that he offered to purchase the entire land of Israel at a high price from the king of Egypt at the time, who ruled over the Holy Land. The land itself was barren and desolated. He also suggested that ultimately, possibly, in the event that the first one should be rejected, to request the minimal purchase of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. The rabbi explains at great length how the renewal of the temple service will lead to the mass immigration of Jewish people from the lands of their oppression, resulting in eventually in the settlement of the entire land of Israel. Smart man. You know, they wanted him to purchase the whole land, and even give them a portion of another land, and that would be in Africa, because they were going to purchase a large sum of land in Africa and see if they would do the trade for that. As we go to, he talks about, it's a time to weep. Yes, you weep, yet you celebrate the whole thing of, we're going to rebuild the temple. We know that this time is coming. And we're in the time frame where we're going to see it. And he makes a quote saying from, it may seem odd to quote Ecclesiastes written by King Solomon rather than the Lamentations written by the prophet Jeremiah during this time, which describes the laying waste of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. Yet the scroll that was written by King Solomon, who built the house of God, whose loss is commemorated, much has to teach us concerning the destruction of the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. There is a time, there is a season, and a time for every purpose under the sun. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, time to pluck up that which was planted. A time to kill, a time to heal. A time to break down, a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to rend and a time to sow. And a time to keep silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. Time is dynamic. Time marks change, and time itself is a vehicle for change. God created in our world within our dimension of time, and it marks the progression of God's revelation to man. I thought that was awesome. This is what we do. This is not to say that there are other Torahs revealed by God at later dates. Yet quite the opposite. That Torah, the original revelation, continues to reveal itself to the people of Israel through the medium of time. For the Jewish nation, historical time chronology is merely a garment for the inner spiritual man. This revelation of God's word through linear time is complemented by another calibration of spiritual time, cylindrical time. The Hebrew calendar. The months, weeks, and days of the Hebrew calendar don't merely mark historical events that happen once. They are to be remembered for a time of memorial. The pilgrims' feasts they're all appointed days. Don't merely remind us of a ritual or a tradition. That's what I was talking about earlier. We need to perform. They reawaken a spiritual moment and relocate a spiritual place within the soul. He says Jewish soul. They reopen a window of perception and access to a greater spiritual truth. They rekindle a living and loving relationship between God and His people. They reopen an opportunity to repair and refinement, for cleansing and correction of past misdeeds. The Holy Sabbath itself, which opens up for its beloved, the Jewish people, every 7 days, is not grounded in historical time at all. The source of its blessing derives from the creation of time itself. The Holy Shabbat is timeless in the holiness which permeates and emanates from the Sabbath is timeless by nature. It binds us to a moment beyond moments, a primordial light which, like a heartbeat, pulsates through our very living, our spiritual being. To everything there is a season. A time for every purpose is under heaven. It comes to teach us that time itself is a tool for change. If we learn how to grasp time and utilize its potential, we can change our own nature, and we can transcend birth and we can transcend death. We can plant when planting and is necessary, and uproot when our spiritual growth calls for uprooting. There's wisdom right there. We kill that which must die within us and heal that which needs to be healed. We break down that, what needs to be broken, and we build that whose time has come to be built. The 9th of Av, commemoration of the destruction of both the first and second temples, of the collapse of Bar Kokhba rebellion, and the later historical tragedies such as the expulsions of the Jews from Spain, is a date on the Hebrew calendar like any other date on the Hebrew calendar. It contains a spiritual content, as does other dates on the Hebrew calendar. It contains within it the spiritual power to affect rectification, repair, like any other date on the Hebrew calendar. So why do we treat it differently? Why do we relate to the 9th of Av as we might relate to garbage collection day, or an appointment with the dentist, or tax return day? In other words, a day in which we have an obligation, unpleasant though it may be, that we really need to tend to. Least we regret not doing it so in the morning after. In other words, like secular day on a secular calendar, the 9th of Av is a sacred day born into our collective Jewish consciousness on that day that the spies returned to the Israelites in the desert and gave the evil report concerning the land of Israel. Painful day, yet nonetheless a sacred day on the sacred calendar. The 9th of Av is a sacred day that demands tending to the most fundamental spiritual levels. For bound within the spiritual nature of the 9th of Av is nothing less than the destiny of our own souls. We ignore its potential at our own risk, yet ignore it we do. Year after year, we ignore the 9th of Av by faithfully observing it each year, by sitting on the floor, doing the dirges and all that. You know, and he goes into all of that, the dirges and all that, and yet comes back out on the other end of it and talks about how we focus on the rebuilding. Yet that whole thing when he talks about a time for everything is so awesome. So awesome. Because it is. This is a time and there's a season for everything. There's nothing new under the sun. We know that. So during this time frame, we look at it. What can we change? What needs to be changed in our lives? You know, what needs to be torn out? Or like he said, what needs to die and what needs to be given life? What needs to be, you know, healed? And so this is a time where we need to focus on the spiritual aspect of it. You know, from now going forward, and even in every other event that we go through of the other festivals, instead of focusing on, like he says, doing the dirges and just doing the same thing over and over. So that's not the reason why we do it. We're doing it in remembrance of it. Yet we have a hope. We're not focusing on what happened before. We're focusing on what's going to happen ahead. You know, that's like Sukkot. Same thing. We're looking on what's going to happen in the future. Yeah. And he talks about, because we're in this time frame, it says the Zionist movement and the creation of the state of Israel set into motion new forces that began to transport the Jews back to their future with a speed and relentlessness that has never been felt for 2,000 years of history. Spiritual change had begun once again for the Jews. Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel marked the end of the physical exile of the Jew. A renaissance of Jewish civilization beckoned. Yet at last, the spiritual exile of the Jew that the secular Zionists were so zealous to reject still rested heavily on the heart of every Jew, secular Zionist, as well as the observant Jew. When God granted victory to the Jewish nation in the Six-Day War, when the land of Israel in its entirety, including the very heart of God's creation, physical as well as spiritual, Jerusalem and Mount Moriah, were returned to Jewish sovereignty, the curtain finally closed on the spiritual exile of the Jewish people. That's the hope they were looking at. And like he says, once they start building the temple, you're going to see the masses come in. I mean, even during all of these days here, you're still seeing people making Aliyah. And you would figure, you're watching what happened on October 7th, they wouldn't. Yet, even more so, they're doing it. It's because they know there's a hope and a future there. Okay. The knowledge existed in the very books that God-fearing Jews studied every day, yet these chapters containing the necessary information went unread. The 2,000-year exile had taken its toll. The daily expectations of a quick end to the exile and return to an earlier historical splendor, which had carried the Jews through the long exile, still remained deep in their hearts. Yet years of despair and despondency had placed that hope beyond reach of the readiness to act upon it. When the historical opportunity presented itself in the aftermath of the capture of the liberation of the Temple Mount, in the light of the lack of readiness with the nation of Israel was caught, 2,000 years of yearning soon turned into fear. The secular Zionist political leader of Israel feared the responsibility of being sovereign over the Temple Mount. They feared, and this is the thing, they feared the Muslims, the Arab Muslims' reaction to Jewish mastery over the Mount. And that's why they gave them the site over it, which they should have never done. Yet, it's coming back. Let's see, many of Jews, let's see, so they were looking at it was been during the times of both the first and second temples that they were fearing all of this. The capture of souls of many Jews on a purely, psychological or perhaps psychological level. Another truth was making known that the people did not like change. Building the Holy Temple means changing everything. Not the least of those changes is spiritual focus of the Jewish people. This was perhaps the most difficult for the religious Jews to contend with. I could see why. So they kind of had a collaboration engaged between the secular and political leaders of Israel, many of the rabbinical leaders, for the purpose of which was to render Temple Mount and naturally the Holy Temple itself off limits to the Jews. It was a big mistake. So they end up doing that. So they locked the gates, and for that period of time they wouldn't let nobody in there. And even today it's hard for Jews to go up there. If they know you're going up there and you're going to pray and stuff like that, they prevent you from going up there. They try to prevent some of the politicians from going up there as well. Like the one that went up there and caused a stir, and he's a bold one. I would like to see him move in the government. He would be an excellent. He pushes it. He pushes it. He pushes it in a way that it forces people to make decisions. He made a decision to push that all Israelis should have guns, and not all Israelis can have guns. Yet, because they hold up the getting the permits for a gun, it takes so long that people don't have the time to even get a gun. He pushed that to where you can get a gun quickly. So, and people were very happy. And that happened after October 7th. Yet it shouldn't have taken something like that. Yet, in despair, hope came out. They turned that around. So now the Israelis are allowed to get guns, a lot quicker than they can. And the whole process of what they're looking for has been reduced, so it's easier to get a gun, where before you couldn't. Unless you were in the military, So, I want to skip down to... So he goes and starts talking about, where we go. For these 1,000 years, it was decreed earlier by the prophets of the God of Israel. For these Jews, their religion was a convenience and a way of life. It was a calling to perform the commandments of God had commanded them, and to create a dwelling place for God here on earth. Squeezed out of politically by their observant and non-observant brethren, these Jews had to go along with it. Reviving and restoring an entire body of knowledge, they had succeeded in bringing the future of the Temple Mount and the Holy Temple to the forefront of the Jewish experience. An awareness of the historical inevitability and the spiritual necessity of the Third Temple had re-entered the consciousness of the Jewish people. A growing understanding of the fate of the political state of Israel, as well as the spiritual nation of Israel, is bound to what will be on the Temple Mount, in a way no less profound than it was binding of the Yitzhak by his father Abraham on Mount Moriah. At the dawn of the Jewish history some 3,800 years ago, as more Jews are opening their hearts to the Holy Temple, those who have yet to be swayed have grown that much more fearful. As a result of that fear, the oppression has grown harsher. Access to Temple Mount by individuals has grown more prohibitive and often demeaning, and they are. Where they pull you away and they arrest you right there. Any outward acts of prayer are forbidden. They had one rabbi up there. He moved his lip, and they quickly grabbed him and arrested him and dragged him off the Temple Mount, and they accused him of praying. He didn't say anything. His lip just moved. So that's how strict they are. So a talk of change in the status of the Mount to accommodate the free spiritual expression of Jews in the holiest place on earth is met with hostility. And they're forcing that issue right now, which is awesome because they have the upper hand on it. Yet the movement of the Jews back into history of their people is a growing tide that cannot be stemmed. A great responsibility has returned to our hands. The keys that the priests returned to the safekeeping of heaven on that 9th of Av, 1941 years ago, have been thrust back into our hands. God has entrusted us with our fate and with his future, as it were. On this earth, we must understand that the fast days of our times are the very last fast days to be. We have been blessed with the ability to make this happen. We have been entrusted with the responsibility to see that it happens. These days of mourning the destruction of the second temple have ended. The days of mourning of our own lethargy regarding the third temple will soon be over. The time has arrived to effect the repair and to establish the 9th of Av as a day of rejoicing forever. And that's what Ema was talking about, that we need to turn this around in the way of the thinking. Because it needs to be a day of rejoicing. Because out of tragedy, he always does something great. Not to say that tragedy is a good thing to have, yet when tragedy comes upon, that's an opportunity to see God work. And he says, this is our choice if we only close ranks and unite to make it happen. Think about that. Only if we close ranks and unite to make it happen. That can be said about us and those out there who are watching. If we can close ranks and unite, we can make things happen. It's a powerful story. And it's amazing how powerful it is when you really look at it in that perspective of that hope of rebuilding, because of the spiritual implications, and for us as well, the implications it has for us. The rebuilding, there's a time to heal. There's a time to, in our spiritual temples, in our own bodies. There's a time for everything. It's like, what season are we in? The sons of Issachar, you should know. What season are you in? Amen? So in this time, in this season, it's an awesome time to know that, yes, the third temple is being built. And it's in our time. We will see it. Because they already have everything there. Like I shared earlier, you can go to Jerusalem and you can see the golden menorah. They got it in that glass case. Matter of fact, when you see them going down to the wall, they usually show people walking by it. Like I said, it's only a matter of time. Now, because we watch Israel, and that's the time frame of everything, they're also dealing with the red heifer. And now they believe they have one, and everybody's watching that one. Now, interestingly, the heifers that they've been looking at, the red heifers, come from a ranch in Texas. Amazing. So it's like, what else do they have? And how close are they to rebuilding it? That's why they're pushing going up to the temple, so more Jews can go up on the temple, and the more you get up there, the more activity goes on, the more it's accepted, the more it becomes normal. The more people will get conscious of that. Amen? Amen. Shalom, shalom. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.